Well, my first guest earns more than that, but not much more than that as a Member of Parliament. And Lloyd Russell-Moyle, your MP for Brighton, Kemp Town and Peacehaven. So I make the point that a train driver with overtime can earn about $70,000 a year. That's not an uncommon amount of money. They're still stuck with 35-hour working weeks. We're still stuck with a 1919 rule that Sundays are somehow overtime and not part of the normal 35 hours. And it's all well and good, Nick Lynch saying, look, we want this, we want that, we want the other. But it doesn't seem he's prepared to get the union to come into the 21st century.
Well, first of all, train drivers are not striking this week. On the whole, train drivers are represented by ASLEF.
Yep.
And ASLEF has not balloted to strike. So one could argue maybe that they are, at the moment, satisfied, although I'm sure that they will also be feeling the squeeze.
Well, the tube drivers, the tube drivers are on strike tomorrow, and they are drivers, and they're earning that kind of money. Well, so there's a lot of drivers on strike tomorrow.
The average worker on strike tomorrow will be earning £31,000 a year, about 200 quid less than the average wage in this country. So the average worker striking tomorrow will be slightly less, earning slightly less than the average worker in this country, and a large number of those people, some of them will be earning more, of course, but a large number of them will be cleaners, they will be station attendants, they will be people who are on very low wages, if not just slightly only above the national minimum wage. So there is a problem for some of those workers. But there is a bigger problem here around safety on the railways. Now, the passenger numbers have returned to about 83% on the railways, according to the latest figures this month.
Depends where you look at it, but but they are down.
But they are down about 20%. Now, in Wales, the RMT and the Welsh Government got round the table with the train drivers and negotiated, and they negotiated a deal that would see a protection for employment for a period of transition. By the end of the transition, there might be changes. But for the period of transition, no compulsory redundancies, allowing people to move into other areas of the railway so that people's livelihoods can be protected, but you can have modernisation. And they agreed a percentage, of course, that wasn't the initial asking point of RMT, but they negotiated a percentage. If we look at it here in England...
But Mick Lynch does not want to negotiate with Tories.
Well, Mick Lynch put forward...
that's the problem, isn't it? Or part of the problem.
No, I don't think that is the problem. He's been asking to negotiate with Conservatives. He's been asking to negotiate with Conservatives. Of course, that is...
He's been utterly party political throughout all of this.
He's also condemned parts of the Labour Party as well. So let's be clear.
How can you condemn the Labour Party? I don't know what the Labour Party's position is. Well, I mean, what's your position?
My position is that the strike shouldn't have gone ahead because the government should have negotiated, but the government put the union in an invidious position. The train operators and the government only came forward with a counter proposal yesterday. Now, that is no way, after 3 weeks' notice, to negotiate a strike. I remember when we had the bin strike in Brighton, the Greens stood back and they said, this is for the officers and the managers to negotiate, nothing to do with us. And in the end, it required us and the Conservatives to force the Greens to get round the table, get a mediator in, and that's how we stop the bin strikes. You stop it through negotiation with political and politicians. And the Conservatives are refusing to get round the table, and it might take us to force them to get round the table.
There's a lot of criticism of the Conservative Party, but I have no idea what your party's policy is.
I have no idea. Our view is that the Conservatives, just like when the Greens, should get round the table and they should negotiate a deal like Wales.
Do you as a party support people going on strike tomorrow?
Well, I think they have been left with no other choice. I would prefer that they didn't. But at the moment, the government refusing to negotiate means that without any other choices, they are, of course, inevitable. That is a real shame. So I will support them. Of course, I will support those individual workers who are making that difficult choice. But I want it to end as soon as possible, and that's how you negotiate.
The government is going to try to stop wage inflation. I mentioned the 1970s in my talk earlier. It didn't really matter whether it was Wilson or Heath in office. The wage demands kept coming in from strong unions and inflation kept going and kept spiralling.
10% is the starting point of the negotiation. All the RMT are asking to stop the strike is an agreement that there will be no compulsory redundancies while the restructuring process and modernisation in the railways happens. Now, that is not a hard demand to meet. That is not a demand
Are they
for
prepared
high...
to modernise? Are they prepared to get rid of the 35-hour week?
Well, in Wales...
In England they are.
In Wales, they have discussed that and they have agreed a pathway to modernisation, and it is the same leadership in England. I don't see why they wouldn't agree something very similar, but it requires decent people to get round the table and negotiate, and at the moment, they've asked the government to negotiate and they have refused to attend
We
meetings.
will ask Paul Scully, Minister for London, that very question in a few moments' time. Lloyd, if we apply this principle to postal workers, to school teachers, to throughout the entirety of
to barristers,
the public sector, and even in the private sector, I mean, Mick Lynch says he's not against a general strike. We've not had one of those since 1926. Do you think, with inflation going into double digits and if pay rises stuck at 2%, would it be justified to have a general strike?
Well, I would think that we should be doing everything we possibly can to avoid a general strike, and I'm not sure that that would be helpful, although if the worst comes to the worst, you can never rule anything out. But I would be doing everything to prevent that because it is catastrophic for this country. But let's be clear, there is another route out of this. The government, like other governments around the world, could have properly capped energy prices. They could have stopped these huge profits that are being made.
Capping energy prices is a disaster.
Well, it's not true.
It's a total disaster.
That's what's happened in other, parts of the world.
Come back another time and debate energy.
Other parts of the world. And
I'd love to do that.
That is the acorn, and the Bank of England said this, that is the acorn of inflation. What we need to do is get rid of the kernel of inflation that we have at the moment, and that will also reduce the demands for wage price increases.
Excessive government money creation across the Western world is the kernel of inflation.
Maybe.
But come back another time and
let's
debate
debate that. Let's debate it.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.